He says, don't use God to change your circumstances. Rather, he says, let God use the circumstances to change you. I don't know how you feel about that. I don't know how that comes across to you, but I think that's a word worth living out, because some of the most positive and productive changes we enjoy in life grow out of negative circumstances and experiences. And that really appears to be the life lesson, at least one of them, that Paul has learned well and is sharing with us here in these handful of verses under consideration this morning. Now listen, if you'll allow me to jog your memory for just a moment, and without me preaching last week's message, you'll remember that Paul penned this letter largely as a response on some level to some superficial and false teachers who were undermining his authority and undoing his advancements for the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so he writes this letter to reestablish himself and his authority and to address the damage and the havoc that was being caused by false teachers. And it was in the process that we come to chapter 4. And here Paul reminds the church that the ministry that he and you and I, that we all operate in, is not really the object of our own self-will. Rather, it was received, and it is received as a gift given by the Lord himself. And Paul goes on to tell them that in the face of discouragement that comes in the process of carrying out the ministry and engaging in ministry, the trouble that comes and the discouragement that comes with living a life that is led by the Lord, in the process of facing discouragement and persecution, he was helping them to understand that it was the same God that endowed them with the ministry that was keeping them. It was the same God that was delivering them. It was the same God that was accompanying them and sustaining them. God did not only give them the gift of ministry, but he gave them the power and the endurance to sustain and be successful in ministry. He goes on to tell them that they are not to allow themselves, and we are not to allow ourselves to be so overcome by our circumstances that we quit and that we give up on the gospel and that we give up on ministry. In fact, Paul says that we and I ought to absolutely not lose heart. If you remember, Paul tells them, and he's telling us that if there is one thing that you and I cannot afford to do, it is lose heart. If there's one thing that we cannot negotiate, it is our faith. God has been too good. He's been too consistent. He's been too dependable, and his promises are too rich and too great for us to give up on the faith and abandon our mission and our purpose in light of our circumstances. He tells them that in all things we cannot lose heart, because although we face problems, although we face perplexities, although we face persecution, we are empowered in Christ and by the gospel. Then he tells them that some more good news. He tells them that while their bodies are prone to disease, disorders, decay, and death, but the part of them that was born again, the innermost part of them was being completely refreshed and fully strengthened as they went along. Paul tells us that although our bodies are decaying, we are literally falling apart and breaking down. We are being regenerated. We are being renewed inwardly each and every day. That's where we left off last week, and that's where we pick up this morning. Paul just finished telling them, yeah, we're breaking down, but we're coming to life at the same time. But then Paul keeps encouraging, and he tells us that through all of the struggles and the setbacks, through all of the breakdowns, our ability to not lose our grip on our faith, our ability to not lose sight of our mission, he tells us it is a matter of perspective. I want to help somebody in here understand, in case you don't, and those of you who are watching out there, I want you to understand, if you don't get anything else out of the message of this morning, you need to understand that anytime you lose faith, anytime you lose focus, it is because you have lost perspective. Paul is telling us here that when we maintain a proper perspective, we maintain our faith and the focus on our mission. Speaking of the trouble and the torment that troubles us and the problems that plague us, Paul says in verse number 17, he says that they are momentary, that they are light afflictions. In other words, Paul is saying here, now to be clear, let me slow down a minute. Paul, when he says that our afflictions are light, I want you to understand that Paul is not just talking about physical affliction. I want you to understand that Paul is dealing with the sum total of our experience with affliction. It is not just a matter of what you experience in the physical. It is also a matter of what you experience in the spiritual. If I had a little more time, and if the church was here to talk back to me, I would tell you that oftentimes what we experience in the physical impacts how we live in the spiritual. The reality is that God has connected our bodies to our spirit, not so much that our bodies overcome our spirit, but the reality is that our spirit and our physical natures are connected one to the other. And so when Paul talks about our affliction here, he is not just simply talking about what happens to you in the physical. He's also referring to what happens to you in the spiritual. Now listen, it's worth pointing out here that the word for momentary, it carries the idea of suffering that we pass through in a brief period of time. That's what this idea of momentary is dealing with. And then the term there for light suggests a level of ease. Watch this now. Paul says our troubles, our afflictions are light and they're momentary. He says they come and go with the blink of an eye. And he says they are light in the sense that they come with a level of ease. They are relatively insignificant. There is a degree of inconsequence and an element of triviality. In other words, Paul says our troubles are easy. They are a piece of cake. Paul's looking at our trouble and his troubles, and he's saying at the end of the day, they don't really add up to too much. They are minor annoyances and untimely inconveniences. Now listen, I don't know about you, and I don't know how that lands with you, but if you're like me, you don't know how Paul could say that. When I first read that, I wasn't really sure how to take that and how to process that. I mean, I can only speak for myself. I can't speak for anybody else, but I've had my share of aches and pains. Come on, somebody. I've had my portion of problems and difficulties. I've had my troubles with temptations and limitations all of my life. I'm not sure I understand what Paul is talking about here when he says our trouble and our difficulties are light and momentary. There have been moments and seasons in my life when I thought I was going to lose my mind. There were episodes where I thought trouble was going to overtake me. There were nights when I nearly had nervous breakdowns. There have been days when I almost drowned in depression. Don't tell me that my troubles are light and momentary. There have been seasons when my soul was suffocated, my spirit was shattered, and my faith was down to the floor. There have been times when the devil almost destroyed me and his enemies almost eradicated my very existence. How can you tell me that my trouble is light? I don't know about you, but one of the worst things that can happen to me is for me to tell somebody about my troubles and how they are impacting me, and to feel like they're just blowing me off, like what I'm worrying about, it doesn't mean too much. And if you're not careful, when you hear what Paul is saying, you almost get the impression, you almost get the idea that Paul is blowing off the fact that in this life we have trouble. You almost get the impression that he's blowing off the fact that in this life we have tribulation and we have problems and we have issues. But Paul keeps writing and he tells us that everything that we endure, every earthly affliction is a light and is momentary when we consider the eternal impact and investment they are making on our lives. Paul says, listen. You can say that it's light. You can say that it doesn't amount to much. You can say this is easy stuff. You can call light a piece of cake when you understand what it is accomplishing for you in the afterlife. I can get through this life when I understand what is being prepared for me in the afterlife. Paul said it like this. He says, our light and our momentary afflictions, watch this now. He says they are producing for us an eternal weight of glory far beyond all comparison. And listen, in case you missed it, the preaching point here is that Paul's attention was not arrested by the here and now. It was apprehended by the then and there. And I've come by to encourage somebody here. I'm encouraging somebody here who's listening, somebody who's watching, that if you are going to hold on to your faith, if you are going to accomplish your mission, if you are going to be successful in walking in your destiny, we cannot afford to be so arrested by the here and now that we cannot apprehend and appreciate the then and there. Paul says, listen, I'm not fixated. My mind is not focused on the here and now because there's not really a whole lot to celebrate in the here and now. If I thought y'all would talk back to me, I'd tell you, praise the Lord, that many times you look up in life and it ain't a whole lot to shout about. Good God Almighty. There's not a whole lot to celebrate. There's not a whole lot to post about on Facebook and Instagram. There's not a whole lot to brag about. And so Paul says, listen, I've learned I don't focus my attention in my mind on the here and now, because when I look at the here and now, I see a whole lot of reasons to get discouraged. I see a whole lot of reasons to quit and give up. I see a whole lot of reasons to turn and run the other way. I see a whole lot of reasons to throw in the towel. And so I don't look at the here and now. I've made up my mind that I'm going to be apprehended. I'm going to be accosted by the then and there. I've got my eyes focused not on what I can see, but what is unseen, the then and the there. And the result is, when we do that, an appreciation for the affliction. Paul says, I'm talking about perspective. He says, I'm not focused on the here and now. My eyes are fixed on the then and there. And the result of my eyes being focused on the then and there is that I can now appreciate the here and now in a different way. He says, I can appreciate what I'm going through now because I understand what I will inherit then and there. In other words, Paul found purpose and value in his affliction. He found purpose, he found value in the affliction he experienced for, watch this now, this is a caveat, for the sake of the gospel. And the value was that God was producing glory through his story. Good God Almighty. God, he understood that through his suffering for the cause of Christ and for the advancement of the gospel, the heartache and the hardship that he was experiencing in the process of trying to save souls and keep souls saved, the discomfort and the misery that he endured in the process of carrying out his mission was producing a glory that was to be later received and enjoyed. And it was here in this earthly life that he embraced that perspective. Listen, let me stop right there and tell you that you appreciate affliction and pinpoint the productivity in your pain when you begin to grow as a child of God. The fact that you In other words, if you find yourself experiencing trouble and the trouble is getting the best of you, it does more to deter you than make you more determined. I want to suggest to you that it's an indication that you have some growing to do. When you begin to grow and when you begin to mature in the faith, there is a level of appreciation that you gain for your affliction, and you are better able to pinpoint the productivity of your pain as a child of God. You can see how God is bringing about some good in what you are experiencing. It may not be comfortable, it may not be pleasurable, but it sure is, praise the Lord, producing something in you as a child of God. That's why every child of God ought to ask themselves, what is your pain producing? What is God trying to accomplish? What is being produced through the pain that I mean, after all, if you're going to go through some pain, you might as well produce something. I mean, it might as well be accomplishing something. If you've got to experience loss, if you have to experience grief, if you have to experience discomfort, it ought to at least be producing something that you can enjoy later. I said every child of God ought to ask themselves, what is my pain producing? When I come out of this, what will have been produced as a result? Yeah, come on, if I had a little time, I'd tell you, don't let the pain go to waste. Nothing is more tragic than to experience loss, than to experience trauma, than to experience trouble and not get anything out of it. Are you understanding what I'm saying? And so I'm encouraging somebody here, somebody watching. Yeah, I know Corona got us all locked down. It's got us experiencing record unemployment. It's got us experiencing discomfort that some of us have never experienced in this lifetime and may never experience again. Praise the Lord. But don't let the pain and the discomfort go to waste. Take this opportunity and let it produce something. Let it produce an eternal glory, an eternal weight of glory, an eternal blessing that will be received when we see Jesus in peace. Paul said, I got to move on. Paul says your pain and endurance, he says this in case you're unclear on what it ought to be producing and what it is producing. Paul says in verse number 17, he says your pain and your endurance through the pain, again, for the sake of the gospel. That's the key word, the key idea, for the sake of the gospel. You ought to be using this pain and this discomfort and this experience to bring glory and honor to God. And when you do that, you store up glory in heaven. He says this pain and this endurance is producing an eternal weight of glory far beyond all comparison. Now listen, it's worth pointing out that this phrase, eternal weight of glory beyond comparison, it really invokes the image of a scale where the struggles are placed on one side and glory and joy is placed on the other. But the shouting point is that when you weigh the two, there's really no dispute about which one outweighs the other. That's what Paul just says here. When you compare the affliction to the glory, there really is no comparison, because right now a little affliction is producing a load of glory. Praise God. Are you understanding what I'm saying? You may go through a little something down here, but compared to what it is adding up to in eternity, there is no comparison. It's light in comparison to what is being produced. And finally, I got to hurry. Paul says in verse number 18, while we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal, they're temporary. But the things which are not seen are eternal. In other words, we don't look at the troubles we can see now. I already told you that. Instead, we gaze at what we cannot see.
Now this is what I don't want anyone to come away misunderstanding. I don't suggest to you, and I don't believe that Paul is discounting or dismissing the problems that we encounter in life, particularly the problems and the challenges that come with age. But he is instructing us to put them in their proper perspective. In other words, Paul is saying we should not spend an unhealthy or disproportionate amount of time dwelling on them. He's saying don't give so much attention to your distractions and your disappointments and your discouragements that you become disconnected, disengaged, and distracted from your destiny. I want to encourage somebody in here that if you're not careful, you'll spend so much time freaking out about Corona and COVID-19 that you forget about Christ and the cross. And so Paul tells you, listen, it doesn't matter how bad it gets. It doesn't matter how rough things get. We don't focus. We don't allow ourselves to be so consumed by what we see going on that we lose sight of what we cannot see taking place in eternity. And so I'll leave you with this. I'm done. I'll leave you with this. Don't be in such a rush to miss the pain that you miss the point. What are you talking about, preacher? It just might be that God is trying to show us something. It just might be that God is trying to teach us something. Now listen, I'm not that guy that's going to run out here and tell you this is what God is doing in this season. I'm not that enlightened to where I can say with a surety that I know what God is doing in this season. But I do know God is doing something. God, I don't know what, I can't tell you exactly what the lesson is that God is trying to teach us, but God is teaching us something. Say amen if you can. I can't tell you exactly what he's doing, but I know he's doing something. I don't know where he's trying to take us, but I know he's taking us somewhere, and we cannot be in such a rush to escape the experience that we don't learn the lessons. See, if you like me, I don't like pain, Sid. You know, you can call me whatever you want. I don't like pain. And when I encounter pain, the last thing I want to do is extend it. All I want to do is get rid of it. You go in my house and in the medicine cabinet, it's all kind of stuff in there. Because I don't like dealing with sickness. I don't like dealing with pain. I'm not a patient person. The Lord ain't through with me yet. Praise the Lord. I don't like to wait. I don't like to be inconvenienced. I like stuff to work the way it's supposed to work. I like stuff to be on time. I don't like to be